Iran. I'll just give you two quotations and see what you do with them. By the way, as we sit here, I should note that as we record this show, President Trump, the Trump administration is negotiating with Iran. The outcome of the negotiation as we sit here is completely unclear. Two quotations. Here's the editorial board of the New York Times writing recently. While President Trump seems eager for a negotiated truce, Iran's leaders do not. Somehow, the weaker nation is in the stronger negotiating position. Here's the second quotation. This is Secretary of State Marco Rubio earlier this very month of May. As President Trump has said, and as the facts clearly bear out, the United States holds all the cards. Close quote. Who's really winning, and how does this end?
This is a tough one. It's where we are now. It might not be the place I myself would have chosen to put us. There's this old joke that's not very funny. Someone is in Ireland and gets lost, trying to get to Dublin, knocks on neighbor's door. The neighbor opens the door and the person explains, "We're lost, we're trying to get to Dublin." And the Irishman says, "Oh, if I were going to Dublin, I'd never start from here."
All right.
So neither would I. But this is where we are, and we're trying to get to Dublin. The problem for us is we need things that the Iranian regime either refuses to deliver, cannot deliver, or cannot sustain over a period of time. And so we're sort of negotiating with ourselves at this point. If you think about Iran and the Iranian problem in the Middle East, the main problem was for Israel that Iran was an existential threat. It wasn't only the nuclear program, which we, along with the Israelis, inflicted very major damage on back in June. It was also the ballistic missiles.
Yes.
It was also the proxies everywhere, not just Hamas in Gaza, but of course Hezbollah in Lebanon, Syria, and one could go on. So this was an existential threat to the Israelis. And after October 7th, they were not going to let this persist. Iran had encroached more and more, surrounding Israel with the proxies and with the strike capabilities to make the threat to Israel intolerable. And October 7th proved to the Israelis that they needed to change the strategic situation. For the Israelis, degrading Iran's military abilities is number one. What might be a long-term solution, how we might get to a better place, that's not necessarily the goal.
But they had to eliminate the immediate threat.
So they have ballistic missiles, we have to reduce their ballistic missile threat.
Right.
They have proxies, we have to reduce the proxy threat. And that's been done. That's been done on an immense scale in what can only be described as remarkable tactical operations. Just stunning the performance of our military and the Israeli military. That we can't lose that fact in our discussion. But that's enough for the Israelis. They call this mowing the lawn. Mowing the lawn is a terrible euphemism. What it means, again, is degrading the enemy's capabilities.
For now.
And then if the enemy builds back the capabilities, you have to go back and degrade again. So you're buying time. How much time you're buying, you maybe can't be choosy. You're buying as much as possible. So for the Israelis, this is a major strategic gain, that Iran has been this degraded. For the United States, the grand strategy has to be much broader. Mowing the lawn is insufficient. It's not just degrading for now Iran's ballistic missile capabilities or degrading for now their nuclear capabilities. We need the Iranian regime to stop being what it is in that region. And we need that for ourselves, because for 47 years they've been at war with us. We need it for our friends and partners in the region, not just Israel, of course, but the Gulf Arabs. We need it for our partners in the Indo-Pacific, who are reliant on Gulf energy. And we need it for our gasoline prices at home, for affordability and standard of living for our Americans. And I could go on. And so what you've got here is a slight divergence between an Israeli strategy of mowing the lawn, which is more or less successful on their terms. They would like to mow it more. They would like to degrade even further. But if this is the extent of the degradation, they've won from their point of view. For us, we need something else. And that's been elusive so far. And again, maybe we didn't understand this going in. So, for example, if you think that the nuclear question is first and foremost, you would want to plan a commando raid that's ready to go to extract the nuclear materials when Iran is distracted by the attacks on its leadership compound. So you would say, okay, let's take it while they're distracted, while they're being pummeled by us, and then we hold the cards. Instead, the assumption seems to have been that, well, we'll decapitate the regime and their replacements will negotiate with us and just hand us the stuff because we will have so struck them with such force that they will see our power and might and therefore will bend the knee to us. So there was no commando raid to take the enriched uranium at whatever grades, the high 60% that's really dangerous, but also the 20%. Now, that wouldn't have been an easy operation, but that's the kind of thing you would have planned to do, which is now immensely more difficult to do because they're not distracted. So we're trying to get to Dublin, and we wouldn't start from here. So what do you do? What's the solution? What's the outcome? A lot of debates about this, and I'm not an expert on Iran, although I know something about authoritarian regimes. For us, the Iranian regime has failed. It's failed its own people. The supreme leader position in the regime is now destroyed, likely forever. People say that the son has replaced the father who was assassinated in the strikes. No one has seen or heard from the son since then. But even if he's still alive, and even if he hasn't lost his face, literally, in the strikes, the position that he occupies will not be the same, a supreme arbiter of all the factions in Iran. So what you're left with is the scorpions in the bottle problem, where they don't trust each other, they are all jockeying, and moreover, they can't feed their people, they don't have any water, they don't have any petrol, gasoline, they don't have any money. So lacking legitimacy and lacking all the fundamentals of basic survival. So if that regime had to deal with its own situation, they would potentially be in serious trouble. And so figuring out a way to force the regime to confront its failures and its illegitimacy in front of its people should be the way forward for us. So degrading a little bit more here, degrading a little bit more there, buying a little bit more time here, buying a little bit more time there, at costs that we don't know what they might be, versus saying, okay, you own this mess now. This is your mess. Let's see what you can do with it. And so that turning the regime in on itself, the regime strategy has been a little bit judo, where the strength of your opponent becomes your ability to destabilize your opponent, turning the tables on your opponent. We need to do the same thing with the Iranian regime. And so I'm not exactly sure where we're going because our own government is not sure where it's going.
Stephen, could I ask this? Is the mistake here, I won't even call it a mistake, we have Donald Trump, a business guy from Queens, and it feels to me, I'm putting this though in the form of a question, correct me, it feels to me as though at some basic level he's saying, why won't these guys come to the table? We've got an obvious deal to do here. If they were nice to me, they've let the oil flow through Hormuz again, they turn over the uranium, we can find ways to help them rebuild. We can do a deal. But Donald Trump hasn't spent his life the way you've spent your life, looking at archives, dealing with authoritarians like the likes of Joseph Stalin. The notion of the kinds of people who populate the Iranian regime are the kinds of people who are willing to machine gun 30,000 of their own people, as they did in protests a few months ago before the war began, even as Stalin is willing to wipe out the higher reaches of his own party in purge after purge and to submit people. That kind of person, the determined ideologue who really is in some basic way willing to choose death. First, he'll choose death for millions of his own people if he has to, but this is just not the kind of person who will sit down and do a deal. Is that correct? And if that's correct, it makes everything harder.
Sadly, I think you're spot on. What would a deal entail for them? They live for the destruction of U.S. power and the destruction of Israel. This is the Islamic Revolutionary Guards. This is not Iranian even. This is something beyond Iran.
They're not trying to recapture the great power of Persia.
They would have different policies if they were pro-Iran. And so, yes, they don't want a deal the way that we understand a deal, which is to say, we concede something, they concede something. And so our ability to negotiate with them has always been limited by our inability to understand who they are and what they are. That's not to say that this was the right approach. Mm-hmm. I'm not a regime change type, but nor am I a capitulation type where you can't do anything. So I've been arguing for years that you turn these regimes against themselves.
Right.
You try to make them see that the factions inside the regime who are disappointed, either from thwarted ambition, they're not the ones feeding at the trough, their rivals are, or because they're generally seeing that the strategy is failing, you try to appeal to them to turn against their own regime. So the success in Venezuela, which has yet to be accompanied by elections, we have not imposed elections on them, which I think was a mistake. But the fact that we were able to turn that regime on itself and change its strategy oriented from anti-U.S. to dealing with the U.S. on U.S. terms, and then the final stage would be confronting their own people, their own illegitimacy and unpopularity through an electoral process. That may come still. That success misled us into thinking that the Iranian regime was similar and had similar motivations. Also, we don't really understand what a regime is. We think a regime is just a bunch of people at the top.
Right.
But a regime is a society. So sure, Iran's 90+ million people predominantly against this regime. They hate this regime, and for good reason. So let's say that that's 70 million or 80 million. It's hard to say, but it's some very large number of Iranian society that detests the regime. But the problem is there's still 20 million or at least 10 million who are pro-regime, willing to die for the regime. That's the society that constitutes the regime. I once wrote a book called Uncivil Society about this very problem. Mm. And so it's not just decapitating this leader or that leader. It's uprooting or co-opting the society that represents the regime. Remember, for these people in the Basij, for example, the paramilitaries that did a lot of that killing that you referred to earlier, for them this is upward mobility. This is social mobility. They don't have a lot of life choices. Joining the regime and becoming part of the regime's repressive apparatus is a ticket to a better way of life for many people in dead-end situations. And then there are many people in the regime that are ideologically committed, as you said, to the death of the United States, the death of Israel. This is what they live for, and this is their sole legitimacy. Without that, what can they fall back on? They didn't raise the standard of living, they depressed it. They didn't make Iran a great power, Iran's a weak power. And so, for a large part of Iranian society, the regime and the society are one. And so if you're trying to uproot this anti-US phenomenon that is ruling Iran, it's deeper than you think. It has roots that you don't understand. And 10 million loyalists with guns is a lot to overcome, especially when the civilians don't have guns.
And when we don't want to commit troops.
Well, they know that we don't want to pay costs like that. And remember, this is not our first time there. We did it on one side of Iran, and then we did it on the other side of Iran. And we all know, and the Iranians too, how those worked out, whether you're talking about Iraq or Afghanistan. Right. And so that regime is in really big trouble. They were not in good shape before, and they've been hurt very badly. And so how could we use the trouble that they're in against them? That's got to be the strategy going forward. It should have been the strategy at the beginning. Again, we are where we are. We still need to get to Dublin from here. And so we need to turn that regime against itself. When they first went to Pakistan for the negotiations, this is an incredible story. Iran got the bomb from Pakistan. That's where they got the bomb, from the Pakistanis. And now they're going to Pakistan to negotiate their nuclear program with us. They're going to the place that they got the bomb from. And we're hoping they're now going to give up the bomb that they got from Pakistan while back in Pakistan. So that seemed to me highly improbable, especially because many people have drawn the lesson that having a nuclear bomb is the only way the regime can guarantee it won't be attacked, like we see in the North Korean case, as you know well. And so here they are, they've gone to Pakistan where they got the bomb to supposedly negotiate the bomb. Moreover, they took 70 people. Who brings a delegation of 70 people to negotiate something? It's clear that they don't trust each other. They're watching each other. And in fact, when the leader of their delegation, the Speaker of Parliament, Ghalibaf, got back to Iran, the hardliners reprimanded him for allowing the Iranian nuclear program to be part of the discussions. He made no concessions, but just the fact that he allowed it to be part of the discussions. And so there was quite an internal struggle over that very question, and he himself is a hardliner being attacked by the other hardliner. So that's our moment of opportunity that we have to realize with the Iranian regime, that they are in big trouble, and we shouldn't lift them out of trouble. We shouldn't give them a hand so that they can fight another day. We should make them confront their own failures with their own society and their own malgovernance. That's got to be our strategy.